proud graduate of UCLA, class of 1990-something, a while ago. But I'm happy to be back in this room. I actually had a class here, so I'm happy to be back in this room. So I'm here representing Student Affairs, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what Student Affairs is, and then more specifically, the unit that I oversee in Student Affairs, because it has a direct impact on students' academic success here at UCLA. So what is Student Affairs? We're a network of more than 25 programs and services, and pretty much in Student Affairs, we touch every area of a student's life outside of the classroom. Specifically, there are recreation opportunities, and that includes the Wooden Center. There are fitness classes through Wooden Center, club sports. Corey talked a little bit about student leadership opportunities through SOUL. Health and well-being also falls under Student Affairs at UCLA. That includes the Ash Medical Center as well as CAPS, which is Counseling and Psychological Services. There are also support services for students through Student Affairs, and I'll talk a little bit about those. Student Life, which covers fraternity and sorority life. Some of you might be familiar with first year experience. And then Corey also touched on service opportunities here at UCLA. I want to talk specifically though about the Center for Accessible Education. That's the office that I oversee. And what is the CAE? The Center for Accessible Education, we facilitate accommodations for students with disabilities. In simpler terms, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what an accommodation is, and some of you who have been engaged in disability services in K-12 might be familiar with what we do, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about what an accommodation is. An accommodation is a legally mandated service that gives a student with a disability equal access to the educational experience. And when I talk to people who may not be familiar with disability services, I like to explain accommodations in this way. Accommodations give students with disabilities the opportunity to demonstrate mastery of academic material without the impact of the disability getting in the way. So what types of accommodations are students accessing here at UCLA? This is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are the most popular accommodations that students access here at UCLA. Extra time on exams, distraction-reduced exam environments, note-taking support, and this year we're starting to roll out more technology-assisted note-taking options, alternative format, disability seating, sign language and captioning, and then adjusted deadlines and attendance. And adjusted deadlines and attendance is really a tricky accommodation because it's reserved for students who might have a condition or disability that's chronic, acute. There might be times where the student is just fine, and then there might be other times during the quarter when the student is having a flare-up, and they might need us to advocate with their faculty members about their deadlines and attendance in class. So what qualifies as a disability? This is probably the question we get most often. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, there's a broad definition of what a disability is. And in its broadest terms, it's a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And I want to touch on that phrase, substantially limits, because that is the key, the key criteria that we look at when we're determining if a student is eligible for accommodations. We sometimes have students walk through our doors and they say, I need accommodations because I have test anxiety. Generally speaking, test anxiety is not considered a disability under the law for two reasons. One, taking an exam is not generally considered a major life activity, okay? And two, most of us feel some type of anxiety around being assessed or taking an exam. Now, if a student is unable to function, they're having severe panic, and they're not able to even get out of bed with the thought of having a test the next day, then that might be considered a disability. But we always welcome students to come in and have a conversation with us if they're not clear about what that is. So disabilities can be psychological or physical, mobility impairments, visual impairments, auditory impairments. They can be chronic illnesses. We have students registered with us that have Crohn's disease or Lyme disease, chronic fatigue. The majority in college, and this is true at UCLA and across the country, the majority of disabilities are hidden. So approximately 80% of the students that are registered with our office have an impairment that's not obvious. The majority are psychological. Here at UCLA, about 40% of the students registered with our office are registered with us on the basis of a psychological disability, either generalized anxiety disorder or major depressive disorder. We also have students that are registered for cognitive disabilities, such as a learning disorder, students with neurodevelopmental disabilities, such as ADD, ADHD, students on the autism spectrum, and then students with chronic illness. 1 in 5 college students has anxiety, and I'll talk a little bit more later about why that might be the case. So here at UCLA, we have approximately 3,400 students registered with us and counting. Since week 1, we've had 350 new requests for services through our office. We work with undergraduate students, graduate students, as well as students in the professional schools. And by professional schools, I mean the School of Medicine, the Law School, School of Nursing. Students must meet the same academic requirements as students without disabilities. And we sometimes receive phone calls through our office asking us if there's a separate track or a different track for students with disabilities, and there isn't. And then finally, a question that we always get from students who are hesitant to seek services through us is, well, I don't want to seek accommodations because I don't want it to show up on my transcript. Registration with our office will not show up on your transcript. It will never show up on a student's transcript. Even though we exist to support students in their academic pursuits, eligible students are just not accessing services the way that we want them to. We did a survey here at UCLA earlier in the year, and we found that 63% of students who are eligible for services are not seeking services through our office. And the number is even higher for students with psychological conditions. It's about 75% of students that could receive accommodations just don't walk through our doors, okay? So we have these accommodations, they're available for students to utilize to help them in their academic pursuits, and they're just not seeking the support services that they need. The estimate is, on average, about 65 to 70% of students across the country at any given institution, they're not seeking accommodations. And so sometimes students believe that they choose not to seek accommodations because they say, well, I've heard people refer to accommodations as cheating, and I don't want people to think I'm lazy because I'm seeking an accommodation. So what we try to do here at UCLA is reduce stigma around that idea that seeking an accommodation is somehow lazy, because it's not. We also want to encourage eligible students to access and utilize accommodations. We do that by engaging in professional development throughout campus, because we do know some faculty members may hold a negative view of a student using an accommodation. So we're constantly working with our faculty partners, talking to them about what an accommodation is, how they can support us in helping students implement those accommodations in the classroom. So, how do students connect with the CAE? On our website at cae.ucla.edu, there's a form there where a student can apply for accommodations. They can request services, and then they can also provide documentation onto that request. Once we get the request, we have 6 disability specialists in our office. They go through a very deliberative process, reviewing the student documentation, reading the student narrative, trying to get an understanding of what will be the most appropriate accommodations to support those students. After that, an intake appointment is scheduled. The student will come in, meet with the disability specialist, and talk about the accommodations that have been approved for the student. What's a challenge for, and particularly for incoming students, is that if a student is coming from K-12 with an IEP, sometimes they just assume that the accommodations they received in K-12 will just automatically transfer over to college, and they often don't. And the reason for that is because there's a different set of disability laws that govern accommodations in high school than govern accommodations in college, okay? So, let me see here. I also want to point out, the CAE does not share private medical information, and we always encourage our students that we meet with to not share their information. Faculty members should not know what a student's diagnosis is. We encourage students not to share that information. We also encourage our students to let us know if faculty members on campus are asking what their diagnosis is, because that information should only be shared with our office. We are the only office on campus with the authority to look at a student's medical record and make accommodations on the basis of that. So we encourage students to just stay in touch with us if there are any problems or issues with their accommodations, to let us know. But the one thing that I do want to emphasize is, and I don't want to paint a dark picture, but psychological disabilities, they are on the rise at colleges across the country. And one thing that I want students to know is that for students that are having mental health struggles, they can absolutely receive accommodations for them, okay? And so when we did that study earlier in the year, I was shocked. I know that accommodation usage is not where it should be, but I was pretty surprised to learn that the majority of students with mental health issues on campus are not seeking support services. And so that I'm here today to emphasize that the importance of utilizing the services on this campus that are available to students. Corey is going to come back and we are going to answer any questions that you might have with us. There are microphones in both aisles if you'd like to ask any questions. And you know what I'm going to do is I'll put our contact information here. Because I work in disability services, people may not always be comfortable asking questions in a setting this way. So my information is there. You're always welcome to call or email me any questions you have about disability services here at UCLA.
And my information is up there as well, so feel free to reach out if you have any other questions.